After a 6-month break, the British Touring Car Championship kicked off at Donington, and the weather was very reminiscent of how it was 30 years ago when Formula 1 had its only Grand Prix at the circuit. The track was damp, then it started to dry, then it chucked it down, then it started to dry again, and by the end of the final touring car race of the day, the sun was trying to poke its head through the clouds. Standard April in England, to be honest. And for many it was quite a weird experience, mainly for the reason that two ever-present entities were not on the grid for the start of the season. It's the first time since 2002 a car entered by the Neal family has not been on the grid, and the other no-show is Jason Plato, who retired at the end of last season. Now there were rumours that he was going to be on the grid this year, which would have made my retirement tribute to him redundant, and Plato being on the grid after saying that he was retiring would have been peak Plato, especially if he'd gone to Team Dynamics, which was the rumour. The Halfords-backed Hondas have been part of the series for a long time, and the team goes back even further to the 1990s, having bought the remnants of the old Vic Lee Motorsports operation. Now Vic Lee was the guy who had his team do an awful lot of testing at Zandvoort and then got busted for trafficking drugs back into the UK. The team has been seen using BMWs, Fords and Nissans, and the team was famous for being the first independent in the modern era to win a race outright, with Matt Neal taking the win at, well, Donington, coincidentally. The team did go on a bit of a break between 2000 and 2003, so to call them ever-present is a bit of a lie, really. Dynamics isn't on the grid because, in their own words, they were having difficulty securing commercial agreements with sponsors. Basically, money. They are supporting one of the other teams on the grid, but it is strange to see a grid without a Halfords-backed Civic on the grid. It's a bit like Williams not being on the grid in Formula 1, I guess, or maybe McLaren or something. Dynamics does want to be back on the grid, so hopefully through this year they can get the backing to get onto the grid for next year. Like I said, it's about money. However, that said, despite the rampant inflation that's happened over the course of the last 12 months or so, the grids have been quite healthy, at least they were at the weekend. Over 20 cars in the Minis, a pretty large grid in the touring cars, a decent sized field in Formula 4 and in the Porsches as well, and it all set up a great day's worth of racing. The first race was a bit of a mad one due to the chaos at the start. The two Napa Fords on the front row made a getaway, but while one got away well, the other didn't. Jake Hill in the BMW tried to cut up the middle only for Ash Sutton to move across in front of him, and Sutton was basically half pit moved across the track and onto the grass on the other side, which clogged the radiator and overheated the engine. So the three-time champion's race was over effectively before the first corner. After the race, Sutton was doing an interview with ITV and said that to overtake you've got to have the overlap and stuff to that effect, and was wondering what the hell Jake Hill was trying to do. But a lot of people, including a lot of self-confessed Sutton fans, all said, "No, Ash, you did that to yourself." And Jake got a 3-place grid penalty for the trouble. It was like, why? But what was also fun to see is that the hybrid rules for the series have been changed for this season. Last year was the first of the hybrid system being put into place, and it was something that was a bit hit and miss over the course of the 2022 season. At some tracks it seemed to work quite well, and the opening round at Donny last year was fantastic, but at others it wasn't so good. And at tracks like Brands Indy they had to change the amount of hybrid that can be deployed over the course of the race because they couldn't charge the batteries up, under the braking that is. Now it should be said here that the hybrid in the BTCC, if you're new to the series, is a bit like push to pass in IndyCar rather than being something like in Formula 1. It used to be that the amount of hybrid available was done on a sliding scale. In race 1, hybrid is done on championship order. For races 2 and 3, it's done off the previous race's results, if that makes any sense. So over a 15-lap race, the winner of race 1 has 10 laps without hybrid, while the guy or girl in 10th only has to suffer 1 lap without hybrid. This can't be used on the opening lap and can't be used below 120 km an hour either. If you try to deploy it below that, you're locked out for 2 seconds. It's a pretty simple system really, and easy to understand a bit better than the ballast system. On top of this, it introduces an element of strategy to things, and you don't have to do mental gymnastics as a new viewer as to who is fast and who's been weighed down. But it did have some concerns attached. It could be very possible someone wins all 3 races. Some felt it was gimmicky, some felt it didn't do much at all, and keeping the success ballast would have been a better and cheaper option. But the BTCC has taken steps to change some of this, and series boss Alan Gow has admitted that there might or would be teething problems during 2022, which is a fair assessment and appreciate the transparency. Also didn't help that during the middle of the testing for this hybrid system, the world was plunged into isolation due to this new disease we didn't know was the next Spanish flu or not, but they plugged on and got it out, being prepared for any issues. For the 2023 season, the top 7 cars in the championship and then the top 7 cars on the grid for races 2 and 3 will have reduced hybrid time during qualifying and the race, and the minimum deploy speed is higher. The rest of the grid has hybrid available for half of the racing laps. That is, half of the scheduled racing laps because laps get added on for safety cars. This has been done to put more in the hands of the drivers and also to keep it as competitive and unpredictable as possible. Like I say, you're not doing mental gymnastics trying to work out who's fast because they're not weighed down and who's fast because they're genuinely fast. 2 compounds of tyre each race weekend with the exception of Thruxton are also back. But because Donington was so wet aside from race 2, nobody used the slicks. Well, some people use the slicks, that is. But this should shake things up a tiny bit more, and now there's no ballast, you're not going to get people on the softer of the 2 tyres getting absolutely shredded. And it's a shame we didn't see some of these new rules in place with the tyres on Sunday. But with that little bit of a dry spell during race 2, it really set up what is so cool about this form of racing. Because every race is about 25 minutes of green flag racing, there's no need for a pit stop unless it's for a puncture, or a sudden deluge. And because there's no Formula 1 style pit stops, if you are taking that time to change tyres, you're going to end up losing yes amounts of time. So when you're in a race where it's still greasy, you've got a decision to make. Start a race on a greasy track with wet tyres and play it safe for the start, with the potential for it to dry out and then roast those tyres, or do you just YOLO it on the slicks? You'll be sliding around like mad at the start, but the wet guys will dry the track out for you, and then you'll have loads of pace if any rain doesn't come. A couple of the drivers took the gamble early in the race. Tom Chilton was one of them and he managed to win the race as a result. Or, if you're Nick Hamilton, you start the race on wets, don't have to pit, and end up pulling off a blinder. And Paul O'Neill on the commentary gave out some nice words. For those who don't know, Nick Hamilton has cerebral palsy. You can see it when he walks up the paddock. He doesn't have the same amount of movement that we do, and it's very difficult for him. And Paul noted that there are a lot of people out there who give him grief on the internet, but he's out there, with this condition, ragging a touring car around a track better than you or I ever could. But something that Paul didn't mention, probably because of time matters and things like that, is that Nick has copped some flack as well in the past because of, well, his brother. That belief of he's only there because Lewis bought him that seat or whatever, but he's done all the sponsorship himself. He's not taken any of Lewis's help at all. The only sponsor that connects the two is Monster. And yes, he managed to take advantage of the weather gamble, but you've got to be in it to win it. And everybody in the pit lane, the paddock and the media, and a lot of people online were absolutely chuffed for him. And given it was wet, you didn't really get an indication of what was working and what wasn't with these new hybrid rules. Furthermore, the next track on the schedule is Brands Hatch Indy, which last season was wet and we had the rear-wheel drives just smoking everybody out the final corner. So hopefully next time out we'll see what the new tyre format is like and how this combines with hybrid rather than the success ballast. It's probably too early to call who might win after just one wet meeting, but the Napa Fords look like they might do some damage this season, and Jake Hill in the BMW also looks rapid, while Ingram will be looking to take his second title. Problem with the last round is that the BMW doesn't like greasy, intermediate, Jensen button approved conditions. It likes one or the other and no in between. But it still looks promising and we still have the usual gang presenting, so it's absolutely great to see it back. Just change the theme tune though. This new one is So then, a look at the opening day's festivities at Donington in the BTCC. If you enjoyed it yesterday, do let me know in the comments on whether you think Hill's penalty for race 1 was justified and who you might think might win the championship overall and, stuff like that. And while scrolling down, like, subscribe, get the bell on, because why not? Massive thanks to the patrons of Patreon for the support. If you want to help out with things around here, there is a link to Patreon in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, and other bits and pieces. Well, there's super thanks if you just want to say thanks, but superly. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind. Have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.